Welcome to another episode of The Marketer's Edge. My name is Mark Snyder. I'm founder, CEO of RSW Agency Search. We're a no-cost way for marketers to find best-in-class agencies of any type or size. You can learn more about us at rswas.com. Today we're talking with Ken Fenyo, the Chief Marketing Officer for Grabango. Sorry, Ken. Grabango is a leading
No
provider
problem.
of checkout-free technology for existing large-scale store chains. Ken, thanks for joining us today. Sorry for mispronouncing Grabango. How have you been?
I've been great. Thank you. Appreciate you having me on.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I've got a small handful of questions for you. But before we do that, can you tell me a little bit about Grabango, how it works, what you do for the company? I'd like our audience to know what kind of company it is and what you do
Sure.
for them.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And as a matter of fact, I will, in fairness, say that it's about 50-50 whether people pronounce it Grabango or Grab and Go. The company actually does spell out Grab and Go, which is
Right.
why it's fair enough. But it's funny, not everyone realizes that's what it spells out. So we are in the space we call the checkout free space. A lot of people might have experienced what we do more in an Amazon Go or with their what they call their just walk out technology. But the short answer is we use computer vision to know where all the products in the store. So when you go and shop, you shop just like you normally do. But the big difference is instead of having to wait in a long checkout line, all you need to do is go to one of our pay stations, literally as easy as tapping your credit card or debit card, or you're using Apple Pay and literally walking out of the store. You don't need to scan. You don't need to really do anything other than give your payment vehicle and walk out. In all of our stores, you still have the option of using a traditional cashier if that's the way you go, but we want to provide this extra option for people who want to get through their day, get on with their day a lot quicker than waiting in a line.
That's great. And what is your role in the organization? What do you do?
Yeah, so I run marketing, and so really there's two flavors for us in terms of marketing, which makes the job interesting or more interesting than some. One of them is more of a classic B2B. Our clients are large retailers. So, for example, today we work with our announced retail partners include Aldi, Circle K, 7-Eleven. We're working with a chain in Chile called Copec. We have a number of other large clients we haven't announced. So a lot of it's that traditional B2B. How do we build our brand with our retail partners? How do we get them excited about working with us? But the other part of the business is actually more B2C or B2B2C, which is we need to engage shoppers in the stores where we're located to get them to use Grabango. Because again, we give them choice. They don't have to use us. So we want to make sure they're excited about it, get them to try it, and get them to keep coming back. And so we sort of work both those angles. Sometimes we do the B2C side directly, and in a lot of cases, we sort of partner with the retailer to figure out what's the best way of engaging that shopper in the store.
Got it. Yeah, I was going to ask you that if you do direct to consumer in addition to sort of the B2B2C role, and it sounds like you do. So
We
that's
do.
great. Is it really sort of kind of up to the retailer as to how they want you to manage it and help them?
Yes. Yeah. And what you find is that, a number of I would say the larger retailers typically want to own it. Sometimes when we're just starting out, if we're doing a store or we're in a couple stores, it's almost in some ways hard for them to want to focus on that small number of stores. So we're probably a little more active in terms of leading the charge. And in some cases, particularly as we scale up, it's a bit of the reverse. That said, it's great whether we own it or we partner. It's very helpful because we're able then to develop best practices. We're able to share, to our other clients as we sort of figure out, kind of trial and error, what works best, what things do we find have the most impact, and then we're able to kind of leverage that for everything we do subsequently.
Okay. One question just came to mind. Grabango, the brand, are you trying to build that brand across the retail partners that you have, or is it all pretty much white labeled and they call it whatever they want?
Yeah, so I would say we're a little bit more of a sub brand. We're a little like an Intel inside. So
Okay.
most of the places where we're at, it's the retailer's brand, whether it's their own name. In some cases, like Aldi is using the name Aldi Go for the service. Other retail partners have used different names, but it's always powered by Grabango. And so I think our hope is we become more of that powered by like a trusted thing. Oh, you know what it is. Maybe you've used it in other stores. Maybe you've used it in, another Aldi and you're now in this different one. So we're trying to create that sense that this technology works. You can really have faith in it. But ultimately, we really want to support and leverage that retailer brand too, because that's the brand that shoppers trust, right? If you shop Aldi, you trust Aldi. That's the place you go, and
Right.
we want to make sure we're sort of helping that brand along, but we're sort of riding on the good value they've created with their
Yeah,
shoppers.
that's great. So you've got a lot of great experience leading up to your time with Grabango. You worked at McKinsey, Kroger, Zoho, just to name a few, and you've touched lots of different areas of consumer retail, like loyalty, branding, marketing, e-commerce, subscription. So I was wondering if you could tell me two things. One, which of the companies that you've worked with have had the greatest influence and or impact on the work you're doing right now at Grabango, and why would you say that is?
Sure. I think on the company side, I would probably say Kroger.
Okay.
So when I was at Kroger, I ran loyalty and digital. And for a few reasons. One, the most obvious one, uh, Grabango's focused on the grocery, particularly the grocery market. We also have a number of customers in the convenience store space. So working at a big retailer really helps to understand how do those retailers think, what's important to them, how do they think about new technology and testing new technology. Um, but from a marketer's point of view, Kroger was an amazing experience. You don't get a chance that often to work at such scale. I used to always joke, we did something like, I don't know, a couple $1 billion in sales a week.
That's great.
And I used to always funny, they'd always joke at the time, they'd always make fun of like the natural and organic group because, they were only doing like 300 million a week in sales. And they were oh, that's almost like rounding error. Why do we even care that you're growing? You're just so small. But from a marketer's point, that meant that any program you created or idea you rolled out would immediately get in front of millions of people.
Right.
So, we created a new loyalty program when I was there. We tested it in, 3 of our markets, but, you were seeing, there was definitely millions of people were getting exposed to that. You were able to get this incredible data back on what was working, what wasn't working. So I think in that way, it was a great experience. The other thing I would say, Kroger was surprisingly innovative for such a large company, right? Whatever they are, $100 billion revenue, hundreds of thousands of employees. But, one of them and one they get the most attention for is around customer data. So, they brought in an agency called dunnhumby, which is now 8451.
Yep.
And really, we did a lot of taking a customer-centric approach driven by our data that we collected on those millions of shoppers. And we're really able to figure out, what the merchandising is going to have the most impact, what kind of promotions will have the most impact. How can we create more of a one-to-one relationship with personalized marketing? And
Yeah.
really was at the cutting edge of that journey that you see a lot of retailers, frankly, still trying to figure out
Right.
how to do.
Right.
And then we did a lot of, on the technology side, it was really willing to try stuff. We were the first retailer to launch digital coupons. We were very early in terms of having mobile as part of our capability. And so, I really think the culture there for such a large thing was willing to try new things and see what worked.
That's great. Kroger right here in my hometown of Cincinnati. So, uh, as it relates to data and analytics with Grabango now, do you is there always a need to partner that tightly with the retailer that you're working with so you can, sort of glean those insights and learnings from, consumers' use of the platform?
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, we certainly, the retailer ultimately owns the customer and they own the data. So we want to partner with them. I think what's interesting and where I think ultimately one of the values will go, and it's something we're still, working out with the retailers, but there's a ton of new data we can really create that I think can help the retailers around that whole range of merchandising, marketing, how do you communicate with customers? But, today, if you think about most stores, they're really black boxes. You kind of know what goes in as a retailer. I put on these items on the shelf. I know what's sold. You really have no idea how people shop the store. And that's one of the areas I think computer vision really can help. Understanding, where do people get stuff? Do they actually even buy off that end cap or that display that, you and the brands put that much time into creating? And I think there's a lot of that new data we can bring that I'm kind of excited to figure out how can we have impact with the retailer as they get access to this new way of understanding. So now you actually know what happens in the store in addition to what's sold. So you marry the transaction with the behavioral data, I think will bring a lot of new insight. So
Yeah.
I'm definitely excited about that. And certainly that'll come as we scale and figure out from the retailers and the brands what are the bits of data and the sort of the analyses that are most important.
Yeah, that's great. It's really cool. Just conceptually, it's really cool, and I'm sure would be of great value to a retailer to understand that. The second thing I'd like to know, just thinking about your background specific to, the things you've been involved with as it relates to the retail space and if, touched over the years, what do you think has best prepared you for the things you're doing right now at Grabango, and why would you say that is?
Yeah, I think from a marketing, I think one of the things I've thought about in my marketing, I have done a bunch of, covered a bunch of areas, been involved in a range of things. But I think when I came to it, a lot of it is, how do you shape customer behavior, and all the things you mentioned kind of go into that, and particularly for new things. I think one I've had the good fortune to do is be early on a lot of new innovations to try to figure out, well, how do I really drive adoption of that? So, I mentioned when I was at Kroger, and then I ran a company called U Technology, which was kind of very early in the digital coupon space. So how do you deliver what used to be those paper coupons digitally? And then, the work I did at McKinsey, I did a lot of new kind of innovation, whether that's loyalty programs or other things, and obviously Grabango. And I think it's an interesting challenge because, while a lot of times we'll talk about things like, well, the fear of missing out, right? Shopper, people get this fear like, I don't want to be out of something. But the truth of the matter is, what I find is it's really more the opposite. There's really more fear of what I call FOMO, which is fear of messing up.
Hmm.
And I find that people are a lot of times reluctant to try new technology because they're really worried they won't figure it out, they won't understand it, they'll make an error, they'll be embarrassed. And so a lot of, I think, what I've learned and what we do a lot at Grabango is, how do you make it people comfortable to try something new, right? How do you create a new behavior? If I've always gone to the traditional checkout line, maybe you go to self checkout now. I always do it the same way, and now I've got this newfangled technology. And there is differences in our technology. For example, one of the big things is you don't have to scan anything. So if you think about going to self checkout, I've got my basket, scan, scan,
Yep.
scan,
Yep.
scan. With us, you really can leave everything in, tap your card and walk out of the store. But that seems great, and it is great. But if you're a shopper and you walk up and you're not really sure how it works, you get a lot of these. My favorites. We did some consumer research, and one of the people had just a great line about it. She said, you show up, and then I'm standing there like a goofy idiot trying to figure out where do I scan my items. Well, the answer is you don't have to scan your items. So then the challenge becomes, how do we communicate that in a way
Yeah.
that people clearly can understand? Oh, that's how it works. So that's really easy.
Yeah.
But before you help them there, it all seems confusing because it's new. I've not done it before.
Yeah.
I always think like self checkout now seems second nature, but imagine the first time you had to go and
Oh
figure
yeah.
out how to scan an item, right? It's
Sure.
like, where is this barcode? What do I do?
Um, Questions based off that. One, I'm just curious if I use the platform in a retail outlet, do I get a receipt that itemizes everything that I've purchased?
You do.
Okay. Yeah,
So yeah, so and the great thing about the system is we're very accurate. So we're at something like 99.9, maybe
that's awesome.
888, whatever. But we're really extremely accurate in the receipt. I will say one of the things that is again a bit of a something you have to get used to, and somebody's used Amazon Go or an Amazon Fresh that had the Just Walk Out, this, but we're not yet a real time system. So when you check out, you'll tap your card and go, and you'll get your receipt. Let's call it 15 minutes, 30 minutes later, and that's because we're processing the order, we're checking to make sure it's accurate. The algorithms run to sort of confirm everything, and that's again just another thing that's different enough. What we do find is, you do it 2, 3, 4 times. I think people start trusting. Oh yeah,
Oh, that's
it's
awesome.
accurate. I'm not
Yeah.
going to worry about it.
Right.
The funny thing is when we in the C store environment, partly because I think it's fewer items. When we ask if people run a receipt, I think it's like 80% of people don't even want the receipt. They just tap their card and go, and that's it. They don't really care. Grocery, it's a little different because I think the size of the basket.
Sure.
But even there's something like 20% of people don't feel the need
Don't.
for a receipt.
That's great.
And I think that's just, it's how, but it is, again, it's another thing that people have to just kind of get used to, right? That's why I think we feel like, how do you build a habit over whatever, 3, 4, 5 trips?
Yeah.
You finally get comfortable with it, and then it becomes the thing you do.
Curious, would you um, do you think that is it harder for you to convince the consumer to use the platform, or harder for you to convince a retailer to sign up and engage with the platform?
Um, yeah, I mean, it's harder to get the retailer,
Okay.
to be honest.
Okay.
Mostly, if nothing else, they're the ones paying.
Sure.
So, there's a bit of reluctance there. I mean, the service is free to the consumer. I think it's a very different motion, I guess, what I would say,
Yeah.
right? The retailer, I think, gets a lot of what's the ROI? What's the cost going to be? What kind of investments do we need to make in this to really have it be successful? I think for the consumer, it becomes a lot more of just making it feel comfortable,
Yeah.
right? How do I make you aware that this exists? How do I sort of simply explain to you how it works, answer any questions you have? And for the consumer side, what we find is it's a bit of we do a few things. One of them, I will say, and it's even funny, a little bit funny when you think of new technology, but I still do think the human touch is important. And so in some places, we use a brand ambassadors for a period of time, the store employees, but having somebody who can just answer a question if you're say like, wait, do I need to scan this? Somebody says, no, you don't have to, just leave your stuff in the basket.
Right.
It makes people just feel more relaxed. They understand it. It's part of that social engagement.
Yeah.
And then of course you have all the things around like signage and, how do I think about incentives to get you to try it a few times till
Sure.
it becomes habit. So
Sure.
all
Yeah.
those things come into it.
So what are you doing now that's proven most successful in convincing retailers to adopt the platform? And also, just secondarily, how do you talk about the benefits of the platform in a way that
Yep.
helps push them over the edge into adoption?
Yeah, I think from the retailer point of view, not surprisingly, retailers are focused on a few things. One, I think they want to know it works, and the good news is it does. We're showing in environments, really fast-paced environments, where we've shown it works in stores, large grocery stores. So, in terms of scalability, I think we're really proving that. But at that time, people, retailers, really any business doesn't want to invest in something new only to have it not work, right? So, I think that's been a big part of it. And I think we've been really successful at the retailers we're at in showing this system works now, scalable now. Beyond that, though, I do think, showing ROI is important. I think we've seen on the consumer end that definitely people will shop more to store that has our solution, right? Because I think it's that no one likes waiting in line. I sort of always joke, it's not like we created the store so people could go have a great waiting in line experience, right? It's that necessary evil that you have to get through to get your stuff and get home. And so I think we find that, if people know they can get in and out quicker, they're more likely to come, they're more likely to throw a few more items in the basket, which drives our ROI. But a big one we're seeing is really around shrink. And shrink has really emerged over the last 6 months or a year as a really driving force. Partly because I think self-checkout has proven to be way more of a driver of shrink than I think retailers initially thought. We did our own research and found that it was.
For our audience, can you explain what shrink is?
Oh, sure. Sorry. Yeah, shrink effectively is the difference between what I bought from inventory and what I sold. A lot of that gets eaten up in things you think of like shoplifting, or people don't scan all the items they're going to get. But sometimes it includes things like food waste, right? If I bought an item and I had to throw it away because no one bought it, or sometimes just inventory goes missing, like we don't know what happened to it. All that goes into shrink. The larger part of it is what would either be pure shoplifting or what we call partial shrink. So partial shrink is basically, I had 3 items, I went to self-checkout, I only scanned 2 of them. Whether you intentionally did that or you just forgot. Like, I'm sure we've all had the thing where you go and you had something at the bottom of the basket and you forgot it was there, and you get in the park and you're like, oops, I didn't scan that, right? So all that goes into it. But what we found is that particularly self checkout, is proven just to be, whether intentionally or non intentionally, it's really driven up the costs of the business in a way that's, I'm sure you've seen it, right? A lot of retailers are either removing self checkout or they're limiting how many items you can have, and almost all of that's driven by the fact that they're effectively seeing more product go out of the store without somebody paying for it than they were before. And what we find is our solution today is reduces shrink by almost 60%. And
Hmm.
that's really at that's really at just the starting point. So we think we're going to really, that'll continue to keep going down. Given the economics, I mean, you think about a grocery store, they have something like 2 to 3%, profit margin. You almost start doubling store profits just from reducing shrink by that much. And so we're finding that's a very compelling message
Yeah.
to the retailers because they're struggling with this now. It's a very top of mind issue. So just by shifting sales from, it's our traditional ways of doing things to Grabango, because we are able to know if you picked up 3 items, you get charged for 3 items, no more, no less. That has a big impact. And so I think stressing that ROI is a big part of getting
Yeah.
people comfortable that this is something they want to do now. They want to expand across more of their stores.
Is the ROI message more effectively tied to shrink relative to, as compared to you're going to have people wanting to shop in your store more, they're going to buy more things? That seems to be maybe a more difficult sort of benefit to sell to a retailer, whereas they can really understand and experience shrink, and if you can prove to them that you can you know change that dynamic, it seems like that would be a much more compelling reason to believe why ROI is going to be better. Is that fair? Or?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, I do think shrink is a particular pain point right now for pretty much every retailer.
Right.
And so I think having a solution that it's really a twofer, right? I can have a better shopper experience, but I know I can reduce shrink, I think is definitely an important selling point. Generally with retail technology, I will say if you can show you can help improve operations, that's usually a quicker path for retailers to want to
Sure.
move forward, right?
Right.
Because it is such a thin margin business. If they can take a few points off their operating margins or add a few points to their operating margins, that has real impact. Some of the other softer benefits are great. It's not that they don't want to see them, but I think anything that you can see pretty quickly on your bottom line is important.
Right. Okay. That's great. Um, I'm curious, what would you characterize as some of the biggest obstacles to Grabango's growth, and how are you working to overcome them?
Yeah, I think I'd say on the retailer side, I think it's convincing people that this technology is ready now. I think there's always a bit of skepticism of new technology. Retailers in general are very complex organizations. They move slowly on new tech. A lot of times it's funny. I've been in the space for a while, and VCs will always be like, I live in Silicon Valley, so I have a lot of VC friends, and they're like, I hate retail, right? They move so slowly, and in some ways they do, but it's because it's such a complex business. I always say, like, you think of a typical grocery store, you're somehow getting 50,000 different items, SKUs from wherever they are around the country into this one store. They're all priced, they're all promoted, they all have to get out of the store into a customer's home. It's a very complicated business. And so, you have to really figure out, how do I make it clear that this is something that's ready now? And with new technology in particular, I think retailers generally want to be in line with technology. They don't necessarily want to be so far ahead that they wind up wasting a lot of money
Right.
on something that doesn't really turn out to be a real thing.
Yep.
Now, the good news is I think we're making a lot of traction on that. When you partnering with some of the retailers we are,
Yeah.
the stores are open to the public, they're working really well. I think that helps a lot. But I think, the challenge is often, is letting them feel comfortable that, somebody, the CIO or whoever's driving the decision isn't, making some sort of career limiting move, that they're moving too early into a new technology area. And I think, having some of these live stores showing it scaling up with, retailers that are, very focused and known for strong operations, I think really helps us in that.
Right. I've got just a few more questions for you. I'm curious, do you use any outside marketing agencies to support, either your B2C or B2B or B2B to C efforts?
Right. So I'd say it's a bit of a sort of. So we don't currently have an agency that works with us directly. That said, we do work with agencies a lot of times with our retail partners. So the retail
Okay,
partners have an agency, and then we'll wind up collaborating with the retailer and their agency on, a lot of that time that's on like new signage in the store
got it.
or branding work around that. And so I guess sometimes we do not with our own team, but we will with retailers engage frequently with
Okay,
agencies.
okay, yep. And then just based on your experience and exposure to agencies, maybe using some in past lives, any advice you'd give to another marketer thinking about bringing a new agency on board?
Yeah, the thing for me when I've gone through this myself and
Mhm.
done it is I think it's really important to know what you're trying to achieve. Like, what's the strategy you have for the business? Where do you have weaknesses? What are the key things that you need an agency to do for you? I think sometimes marketers, just to be honest, can default to the job is picking an agency. You say like, oh, I'm doing an agency review, and that's fine because you want to get the right agency, but you don't want to have the agency defining your strategy for you. They can be a great partner on refining it. So I think in that case, if you're a brand new brand and you're trying to, how do I cut through the clutter? You might need one kind of agency. If you're like a Kroger, thinking about it, you may say, I want somebody who really has great data expertise or an
Sure.
ability to understand how to take my personalized marketing to the next level. So I think knowing, really starting off with that is important. And I think there's a little bit of, to me, it's about finding somebody who has the right mindset. If you're like a retailer and you watch every penny because you're a thin margin business, having an agency that kind of understands that is willing to work with you to be flexible, uh, you know, isn't going to overinvest in areas that aren't as important. I think it is important to do. Um, I'll tell a quick story. One of my favorite Kroger things from our merger is we had this conference room and the chairs were all sort of the arms were all worn, the upholstery had worn off the
Yeah.
chairs, and I always said like, shouldn't we get new chairs? And they said no, hell no. And the reason was anytime someone came in, they'd be like, does it look like we have money? Looking at the chairs, like, does it look like we have money here? We can't pay that. You need to give us a better deal. So I
Yeah.
do think like just understanding, where the business wants to invest and not is important. And I think most agencies are good at that. It's not that they're not, but I think from a marketer's point of view, you want to make sure you're investing where you'll have bang for the buck, but not necessarily just say let's hire everything in
Yeah.
when maybe that's not as cost effective.
One last question for you. If an agency was trying to knock down your door and attempting to win business from you, what advice would you give them?
Yeah, look, I don't think there's really any magic to it. I do think understanding the business and the challenges the business have, I do think is important. We're at a different stage than we were 2 years ago, and
Sure.
we'll be 2 years from now. And so, understanding that, I would say also showing subject matter expertise
Yeah,
is important. It doesn't mean that you have to be like we just do retail, right? But we are trying to influence both on the B2B side retailers and on the
definitely.
B2C side somebody who's shopping in a store. And so having some understanding of that, figuring out how to do like a really fun and creative digital strategy is great. But for us right now, because we're only in a limited number of stores, it's not really as productive as being really good at creating signage in the store
Sure.
that's going to grab attention. And so I think understanding where you're strong, where you have an expertise, and how that matches up, I think is important. No one wants to waste time. I don't. I certainly don't want to sit in a pitch that tells me all about the kind of cool creative we're going to do. When I say that's great, but really the retailer is owning that. I need
Yeah.
more of this sort of stuff, and so that to me is probably the main thing. I think to the extent you can be flexible in terms of, again, can we have a model that if I need to push hard, I can add resources, but if we're in a period when we're not as aggressive, maybe we can scale back. Again, that's a little more of a startup thing.
Yeah.
If you're a Kroger, you've got pretty much a run rate. If you're a startup, it's a little more, there's a little more wave to it, right?
Sure.
Because you have a big thing coming up, I have a big launch, I'm ramping, and then maybe there's a little period when you're not as aggressive, and if you can figure out a ways to marry that up,
Yeah.
that's certainly something that'll be helpful from a agency selection.
It's great. What a great technology and great conversation. It's it sounds super exciting, and it's great that you guys are meeting with success with real life retailers and consumers using the platform. And Sounds like sort of the world's your oyster in terms of expansion. Obviously, there are challenges with doing that and convincing the retailers and consumers, but certainly not challenges that either that sounds like that you faced or others have faced, and so certainly not insurmountable. But really interesting and a really great conversation, and appreciate you making the time, Ken, to share your story and experiences with other marketers.
No, thanks very much. Really appreciate you having me on, and it was a lot of fun. Appreciate it.
Good. All right. Well, listen, you have a good rest of the day and a good weekend.
You too.